I'm Ben and welcome to my book corner, and today we're taking a look at Gone by Michael Grant, the first book in an initial 6-book series, with this one being released in 2008. This book has been sat on my shelf unread for around 10 years at this point and is a young adult fiction book. However, is the book as simple as that? As always, we shall look at the basic story, world building, characterization and writing style, and my own thoughts will be added on at the end. So with all that out of the way, let's just jump in. The story takes place in the small, sleepy town of Perdido Beach, situated close to the coast of California. The town is home to a nuclear power station as well as the Coates Academy, a school for what we shall describe for now as troubled children. Right at the start, all the adults instantly vanish, and after a small amount of time it becomes clear that anyone over the age of 15 has blinked out of existence as well. Also, an impenetrable field has surrounded the town, cutting it off from the outside world, meaning there's no communication and you can't even see through it, and leaving the town isolated. This leads to a group of academy kids coming to help support and run the town, to help maintain order, led by Kane and supported by Drake, the sadistic muscle, Jack, the tech whiz, and Diana, who all act as the main antagonists for this book. This is largely told from the protagonist's point of view, however, led by Sam Temple and his group of friends Quinn, Adelio and Astrid, as well as Astrid's autistic little brother Pete. The initial focus is on how the adolescents cope without any adult supervision, and how that reacts with the world in terms of who looks after the kids, how food is distributed, how they get fed, and what rules end up in place. However, as you get further into the story, it's revealed that some of the kids have mutant-like abilities, for example the ability to set fire to things with their hands and telekinesis. Also, the local wildlife has started to evolve and mutate at an accelerated rate, with some of them discovering speech. There is something hidden in the dark in a cave near the seafront. And finally, they do have to find the answer to the question, what happens when you turn 15 within this area that's cut off from the rest of the world? Do you simply stay, or do you snap out of existence like the adults did? One thing that is quite clear from this is that there are a lot of different plates that the author is trying to set up and keep spinning from an early point. A mild drawback of this being an early book in the series, and actually it's to the detriment of this book as an individual piece. This book is at its best when it's focusing on how the adolescents and the children cope with being left unattended, and how they deal with the responsibilities that they're then stuck with going forward. Nothing that is in here is done badly, but as this is a set-up book in many regards for the rest of the series, it can feel overcrammed and busy at times. One thing that I find really interesting about this book is the approach to world building, or in many ways, the absence of it. And that's, on this occasion, not a bad thing. The shift with the disappearance of all the adults is so monumental that actually the previous world building is pretty much defunct from the off. And the focus is far more on how this group of under 15-year-olds divvy up responsibilities and how they deal with those responsibilities, or don't in many cases. What it does do, however, on a few occasions is discuss the world before, either through conversations between characters, discussions of CCTV as well is used, and a couple of flashbacks which do help to show life beforehand. With that being said, this book is not afraid to do something that most media is. I'm going to give a direct example here to the Avengers movie, bizarrely as that sounds. One thing that was never really touched on was what happened to the planes in the sky when the pilots blinked out of existence, and then what happened when those pilots were blinked back in 5 years later when the snap was reversed, because the planes were obviously at that point not in the air. What this does do is it looks at the consequences of the people disappearing. So very early on, a couple of the characters walking up the road and they find a car crash. Obviously the driver's blinked out. They recognise the car as being the car of a local mother who had a baby, and they straight away know that there's every chance that in the back of that car, when it crashed and before it burnt out, would have had the baby in there. And they can't bring themselves to look in because they don't want to see the horror of the corpse of a baby that had burned. They don't want to deal with having to bury the burnt baby. And there's lots of little instances throughout the book that highlight the horror in many ways that these teenagers and kids are going through. Another example quite early on is that a fire sets off in a house and everyone just stands around watching because there's no fire department. Nobody's thinking we need to put this fire out. They just stood there watching until one person steps forward and starts organising them. And that part of the environmental storytelling that this book does is actually surrogate to the world building in many regards, and it's really, really well done. But in terms of pure world building itself, it is all but absent. It's all character driven world building, and in this case that is a really good thing. So that fetches us to the characters. This book uses the characters to drive the world building as previously mentioned, and from that regard it succeeds really, really well. There is a large ensemble of characters. I'm just going to quickly run through a handful of them straight off the bat. You have your four main protagonists, Sam, Astrid, Emilio and Quinn. On top of that you have three main antagonists in Kane, Diana and Drake. You then have secondary characters like Luna, Computer Jack, Orc, Howard and Little Pete. And then after that you have 8 to 10 other characters that are named that you actually spend times or full chapters with in some case. So there's a lot of people and you see the world through a lot of eyes here. And that does help establish the world and the change and the stress of what everyone is going through. However, consequently that is still a lot of people to characterise from the off in one book. All the characters do get some time and they are clearly all different people in many, many regards. There is some interesting mirroring going on which I'll talk about a little bit later. However, past Sam, Astrid, Kane and to a lesser extent Diana and Drake, most people in this story feel quite one note. You figure out what their base personality is and then their base personality is their job or their task or their responsibility. And that runs through the whole story in many regards. That's not to say any of them are done badly, but there is only so much room in this book for the deep character building, and unfortunately that's where in many ways this book does kind of let itself down with having too much to juggle. What it does do, however, it has an interesting dynamic between the protagonist and the antagonist in terms of almost a mirror effect. To use Sam and Kane as an example, Sam is portrayed as reasonably attractive but not aware of how attractive he is. He is seen as dependable following an incident that happened a few years previously where he became the hero of the day, so to speak. So when stuff goes wrong, people instantly look to him as the dependable lead to help them figure out what's going on and to tell them what to do, even though that's not what he wants, and he doesn't think that he has the ability to do that, and he doesn't want that power. On the flip side, you have Kane. Kane is also described as attractive, but he knows he's attractive. He tells people he should be in charge, he's confident and he's charismatic, and because of that people naturally gravitate to him and do as he says, but he's also shown to be incredibly fallible and short-sighted in many regards. In that way, mirroring the opposite of what Sam is, and you see that throughout all the characters. Computer Jack and Emilio, Astrid and Diana, and Quinn with Drake as well show a great deal of mirroring going on. They're almost like the inverse of each other, which is quite well done. However, even the main characters don't really get a great deal of depth. You do get a little bit of a romance angle going on between a couple of the characters as well. Doesn't feel forced, which is unusual for something that happens so quickly, especially with the way the characters are, but it's reasonably well done. However, that doesn't take away from the fact that these are a few characters in a book of a lot of characters, and it's one book. I think this in many ways highlights the biggest issue with this book is that it is a set-up book in many regards, and that just like in the actual pure story beats, comes through really strongly here in the characterization. Again, you can get the basics of the personalities in there, but it doesn't really build too much beyond a couple of the characters, and that's a shame in many regards. So that leaves us with the writing style, and honestly the writing here is pretty good. There is a lot to try and balance, and all things considered, I think Michael Grant does an excellent job in keeping it as balanced as he realistically could with the amount that is going on and the amount of setup that is needed here. He's really good at conveying the pure sheer emotion of the characters, be it side of attraction, hatred, betrayal, horror. You visually feel it transmitted through the page. The descriptions of the world around, where included, are well done as well and not overwhelming. And the other thing that's quite interesting is that every chapter starts as part of a countdown to the end of the book, and it's not clear early on what that countdown's to, but it does help add a sense of urgency as well as a sense of mystery to the proceedings, which is really well done. The flashbacks and the conversations highlighting the difference to the old world are also well done and are well placed, and overall this book is actually a very well paced piece, all things considered. So this book overall is a difficult recommend for me as a standalone book. This is one that I would say that if you're planning on reading the whole series, should probably absolutely check out. But if you're just looking for a singular book to read, I would say probably don't pick this one. The basic premise of what happens when adults blip and teenagers and below are left unattended is an interesting one, and this book is at its best when it's exploring how the 13, 14, 15-year-olds are coping before they blip out, and how society suddenly switches and changes without the traditional authority figures there. However, this is carrying a lot of baggage from being a setup for later books as well. There are a lot of plot elements here which actually take away time from what was actually a really interesting core story idea. You also have far too many characters to try and fit in as well, on top of the extra plot elements. So for me, this is a 3-star. I am curious to see how this affects with the follow-up books, which I believe the next one is called Hunger, which I am going to try and get hold of and read. Simply because I'm interested to see if they are, once freed from the shackles of being the setup, are more focused and how that affects the way the story is being told. Because this book is well written. There is decent, if shallow, characterization. Even all the different plot points themselves are interesting, but there is too many to just get working into one book. But that's my thoughts. I'd love to know yours. If you let me know in the comments below. Thank you for listening. I will see you all next time.